Welcome to this episode of Mac's Big Adventure. I'm one of your hosts, Kyle Welch, and this is a George Lopez podcast where we are the most comprehensive podcast. We go through every episode of George Lopez and explore it. I'm joined by one of my George Lopez lover co-hosts, Tim. How you doing?
I'm doing quite well. How are you?
Ready to talk some George Lopez?
Always. I'm finally excited that we can. It's about time that we talk George Lopez.
I know, it seems like every episode we're getting ready to talk it, but we can't. And unfortunately, I got some bad news. This week, we're not going to be able to talk about the episode where George and Benny find themselves holding open auditions for workers to replace Reggie's position in the factory carpool after he gets arrested for fighting in a bar the night before. That was a fucking long one. That was a bad thing. We actually have a really good episode. This is pretty exciting. We're going to be talking to the artist on the New York Times best-selling book, The Last Book on the Left, Tom Neely. How you doing?
Great. How are you guys doing?
Quite well. Quite well.
Not too bad. How are you doing? How is that to be attached to? I mean, obviously, like humans and everyone loves
Henry and
Glenn forever. But I mean, like to have a book on the New York Times bestseller is got to be interesting, especially as an illustrator.
Oh yeah, I mean it's awesome. I added that to my bio on my website the other day, and I was like, wow, that's pretty cool. That can stay there at the top for a while, you know. But I mean, day to day, like nothing's changed. You know, we're all in quarantine, so I'm just like still drawing my comics and doing the same things. But yeah, it's awesome to see like how well the book is doing, and like all of the fans are like, some of their fans are like rabid, and it's fun to see their reactions to everything. So I just got a message the other day of somebody wanting to get a tattoo of Ed Gein from my drawing on his back. I'm like, okay, sure.
Man, that's nice. They asked you permission for it?
Yeah, it's nice. He reached out and he was
nice.
like, hey, dude, should I owe you money for this? Or like, whatever. I'm like, no, whatever. That's awesome. Thank you for, it's, I am honored that you want to put my art on your body forever. Like, that's rad,
So, go ahead, Tim.
So how'd you initially get hooked up with the last podcast guys?
Actually, it came about through another artist friend of mine. I'll give him a shout out, Dave Cook. He goes by @BoneThrower on Instagram. He's an awesome artist, illustrator, does a lot of great stuff. Friend of mine, and he hit me up one day and was like, "Hey, have you heard this podcast?" And I was like, actually, at the time I hadn't. I'd heard of it, but I hadn't listened to it. And I was like, no. He's like, well, start listening because they might hit you up soon. And so, sure enough, like a week later, Henry Zabrowski emailed me. I guess they had put a call out on one of their shows saying like, hey, if you got artist suggestions, let us know. And my buddy Dave Cook suggested me to them, and they hit me up. And it just worked out well. Like Henry lives in LA, I live in LA, so we met up for tacos and beers and talked about ideas, and it just like gelled perfectly. Like my morbid sense of humor and his morbid sense of humor worked out. It gelled really nicely. So
Yeah, when they announced you as the artist for the book, I mean, it seemed like the perfect fit. And especially,
Yeah.
I mean, both of us, I know me and Tim listen to the cast and are fans of it. And I know, like, Marcus and, to, I think, a smaller extent, Henry's into comics. So, like, pulling someone from that indie scene seemed like the perfect fit for the book. And then, obviously, your stuff, like, the ability to kind of go to, like, the, like, hyper-detailed, like, cover images you do, and then into the more cartoony stuff, which you've done, like, throughout your career, like, that kind of duality you're able to do, like, is, like, the perfect fit for the book.
yeah, I mean, it was really fun because like immediately Henry suggested like, we want to approach this sort of like an evil mad magazine, and I was like, oh yeah, of course, that's right up my alley because I love to like switch around in styles for the sake of like parody or jokes and whatever, and just play around with that. And I worship Mad and EC Comics in general. So, and then I was like, I brought to the table, I was like, well, Mad was originally published by EC, which was all the horror comics, so that kind of blends well together as well. So, yeah, it was a good blending of all of my loves. And like, oddly, it's funny, like I actually did a series of paintings, portraits of serial killers back in like 1995 in like painting class in college. So Like I've had this subject matter on my mind for a long time. Even though I grew out of it for a while, this like they're listening to them and like working with them brought it back, and it was like a lot of fun to dive back into the ghoulish side of my serial killer history past. So
Did you have a lot of kind of creative freedom in the images themselves, or kind of? I think some of the interesting stuff that falls into the book is when you do the actual like strips and comics in it. I think of like the Dahmer one, because it's not like a lot of the images seem to follow the content they're talking about, but then some of it is like more just extra stuff that you're throwing in. Were you given like a lot of room to breathe into kind of like what you wanted to create for the book?
yeah. I mean, almost all of the illustrations stemmed from an idea that Henry Zabrowski suggested, but he left me room to do whatever with it. So, yeah, it was a lot of room for me to embellish or like also bounce back when I was reading. I asked for like the full text of the book, not just the jokes that he was writing for me to draw. And so I'd read everything and I'd do my own history, own research, and like suggest other illustrations or add to them where I could to add the details. But yeah, like it was a lot of fun. You know, like for instance, like the chapter on Richard Chase, the vampire of Sacramento, the piece that Henry wanted as each chapter begins with a splash page portrait of each serial killer that kind of like defines them. And for Richard Chase, Henry had suggested the piece that's still in the book, but it was Richard Chase doing a lemonade stand where he's like filling cups full of blood next to a little kid who's like got a real lemonade stand. And so that was supposed to be the splash page, but as soon as I read about Richard Chase and I started like looking at pictures of him and everything, I was like, he's like the most pathetic case you could ever imagine. Like you can really like get into like the empathy of like how he got so off track of like mental health like being ignored. And so kind of the most tragic person in the book, and he's also from the Sacramento, adjacent to the Bay Area. Just like immediately, like I thought, like Margaret Keane's Big Eye paintings looked like one of those to me. So I did the painting of him in the Margaret Keane style, and I sent that to Henry and the rest of the writers, Marcus and Ben, and our editor Kate. And I was like, I just wanted to throw this one out there as like maybe this could be the chapter page, and they were like, this is awesome, we love it. So it was a lot of back and forth, a lot of like working together, and it was fun. There's a few jokes that I illustrated that I don't quite get because they were written by Henry, and like maybe they hit a demographic that doesn't land with me. Like I don't know. I've never honestly, I know nothing about Guy Fieri, but I had to draw a Guy Fieri joke, so stuff like that. It's like, but it's fun, It's like it was a really good collaboration all around. So.
I mean, what's that for you? Obviously, you've done a lot of create your own stuff, but even like the humans working with Keegan and that kind of setup. I mean, how different was it than like working from someone's scripts and notes to like jokes? Was it an easy transition for you, or was it? I mean, is it more like in the illustrator type job where you're just given kind of a job to do and you can fill it in?
Not really. I mean, it is an illustration job by definition, but I always approach what I want to work on as like something that I want to put myself into. So it's similar to what I do in my own comics or like working with Keenan in collaboration, but it's a different process than comics. Like comics are way more immersive, of course, than like for this book, the last podcast book, there's probably I did around 100 illustrations, and I think about 75 of them ended up in the book. So that's a lot of work for it. It took me the bulk of a year, but that's not as much as like 100 pages of comics is already like 900 drawings if you break it down into panels. So it's not quite as much as a comic, or not quite as immersive. So it's a different process, but I mean, collaboratively, I found it fairly similar, just because like Henry and I got along so well, and I primarily dealt with him because he lives in LA, and the other two, Marcus and Ben, live in New York. So yeah, it was just fun. Like when I ran into when I was stumped on an idea, like the Guy Fieri, or like another one, I can't remember which one, but like there was another one where I was just like I could not figure out how to make a joke out of it visually. So I just like anytime I just like hit him up and like call him up and be like, hey, but this isn't working, and he'd either be like, okay, well you do it like this, or he'd be like, well, just think of something else. So it was good.
Yeah, it's nice that you kind of had that freedom just to, if it wasn't working, then just try to think of something else.
Yeah, I mean it's ideal. I mean it's like an illustration job where they allow you to be the artist who you are rather than just dictate what they want you to do is a dream job, honestly, and it worked out really beautifully. And those are always the projects that I try to approach or attract. Where it's an actual collaboration, not just being hired to draw something.
Yeah, it was always like in high school. My stepdad ran a graphic design company. He had an office out of our house, and it would just like watch his soul be crushed all the time because I would see him spend like hours and hours. He's like, "Oh, this is a great idea," and he would like send it back to the company, and they're like, "Oh, we don't want that. We want something stupid. Do what we told you to do." And he'd just be like, I'd watch him just hit like delete, and like his soul die.
Oh yeah. Believe me, I did plenty of years of that, working for Disney and whatnot, like in my early years of freelance. So, yeah, there's a lot of stuff that people will never see that I've done because it's so. But it doesn't matter. It was just to earn a paycheck at that time. So it's great to now like be hired for jobs that like I want to work on. So.
For the project, and like we talked about, kind of the cool thing about it is you're able to like kind of approach multiple styles in the book. Even like the chase one is like more painterly, and a lot of it is you're able to dip into the like cartoon roots you had, or like the magazine stuff. Were you able to experiment a lot more with the art and stuff that's gonna like in a realm where like if you're working on humans, you kind of have less room to experiment because you're working on it, but now like you can kind of try out styles that you can take to the other books?
I feel like, well, how do I phrase this? Approaching different styles and like kind of appropriating styles from other sources for the sake of parody is something that I've kind of like done throughout all of my artwork, honestly. Like going back to grad school when you've probably never seen this stuff, but I was doing small oil paintings of like monkeys and bunny characters, anthropomorphic cartoon characters, but they were all recreations of classical oil paintings of like Rembrandt's and like Vermeer's and stuff like that. So it's like something I've always been interested in playing with homage and like parody at the same time, making jokes and on playing with the history of art or comics. And I've done that a lot with Henry and Glenn. And then, so that kind of like naturally translated into the last book on the left where I could like do that more. So, whether that translates to the humans, I'm not sure. Humans is like a more specific thing where I've kind of defined a world myself and I'm not really paying homage to anything specific. It's more like an amalgam of everything like mashed together, I think, in my brain, and it all comes out as the humans. So, yeah, I don't know. It's a little bit different process. Like I think the illustration of like last podcast, the last book on the left, or like my Henry and Glenn work is a little bit more conceptual and analytical when I approach those kind of like parody pages or like homages to other artists. Whereas like humans is like a more naturalistic approach where it's just like pure storytelling.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I never really thought about it, but I'm like kind of dissecting it in my brain right now as we speak.
And you touched on, and I know even in like again the other stuff, and in humans, I've seen you pull a lot of stuff for like references for motorcycles. With this book, obviously, given the book what they were working on, did you have to do further research on your own, not only into the killers you were covering, but then even like maybe tonal research into the cast, kind of like what they're going for. Humor, obviously, you had Henry as like a kind of a sounding board. But was there like extra research on your end, both into like what they were doing and how they approach killers? Because often there's this kind of like, I mean, it is based in humor, but they're very, and they touch on in the book, like, these aren't people to be glorified. They're kind of assholes and
Right.
like shit people. I mean, was this something you had to do research on kind of both ends?
A little bit. I mean, I for one, I immediately started listening to all of their archives. I've listened to almost every episode by now, just to like get a feel for their tone and how they approach the subject matter. And I immediately like, a lot of people that I've turned on to the podcast have told me that their sense of humor doesn't quite gel with them. But I think you have to like. It's like anything, like even like HBO shows. Sometimes like you have to wait till you get to the fourth episode before you understand it. So like the more you digest, the more you get their sense of humor, and that was important part of the research to like just get their tone because it made sense to me because they do approach it with the irreverence of like wanting to make fun of these horrible circumstances, but they also they give reverence to how horrible these things are and kind of their approaches to like if you show and illustrate how horrible these things are, you're not doing a disservice to the story. It's like, if I'm making sense, like
Yeah.
like the recent Ted Bundy movie that was made for Netflix, like kind of like glosses over how horrible his murders are, and it makes him like this romantic superstar, and everybody can be like, oh God, he's so handsome, and he's played by whatever his name is, that handsome actor. So, but it doesn't show you really how horrible and brutal he was. So, like, I appreciate that, like, through their sense of humor, they illustrate how ugly these humans are, and that you shouldn't love them, even though, like, oddly, a lot of their fans do just kind of like love them. So that's kind of like weird, but. But I don't know. I ultimately found that I do kind of agree with their point of view of like how they approach it. But additionally, I do always do my own research. So I was watching, in addition to listening to them, I was watching a lot of documentaries and all kinds of bad movies about serial killers because they're mostly B or C grade movies. Um,
It's
and
like
yeah,
that really
I
bad Gacy one.
yeah, oh yeah, I've probably seen it. And yeah, there were times where my girlfriend would come home from work and she's like, "What? Oh God, you're watching murder again all day." I'm like, "Yeah, I'm sorry." So I don't know. I do like do a lot of my own research. I want to like add as much as of my own knowledge to a project as I can. So uh, yeah, it was interesting. It was fun. I do enjoy like the macabre side of things. So.
Was there a need for you after you kind of wrapped on the project to kind of decompress from being steeped in that for so long?
Oh, definitely. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I haven't. I mean, I still watch the occasional murder movie or something, but and horror movie and stuff. But I have not been listening to much murder documentaries or podcasts lately. I needed a break from it. And luckily, the last podcast guys do some other stuff too. They tackle aliens and other conspiracy theories, so I still keep up with them. But I haven't been listening to as many of the serial killer stuff as since the book has come out.
Yeah, I find it usually I'll go like heavy for a while, and then I'm on like I'll take a break. Which again, with podcasts are nice because they kind of build up. But like I'm listening to like people break down like the history of cartoons currently. But like I got to the point where I was listening to like really like local cases, and I was like, I'm gonna need to take a step away for a little.
Yeah, it can be too much at some point. It really does. Like there were times when I was just like filled with the stress of it, and I didn't even realize it. But my girlfriend would point it out, like, oh, you need to like step away for a bit, because like like in order to like find the humor in the subject matter, you really have to like find the empathy in each character or serial killer. So it's like you really have to wrap your mind around it and then like be able to come out the other side and make fun of it with empathy that doesn't like, I don't know, it's a weird mind trick, but it does involve the absorption of too much murder. And yeah, I'm happy to be on the other side of it. But it was a lot of fun to go through as well.
I think one of the cool things that come out of it too, were is that, and obviously everything with COVID now, but how did the exhibition come about with the artwork following the book?
Well, I've worked with that gallery for, I mean, even for many years. This
Mm-hmm.
will be my second solo show with them. I had a large Henry and Glenn show with them in 2014, and I've been a lot of group shows with them over the years because I still kind of, even though I'm not that big on the art world, I still kind of like participate in the gallery scene here because it's fun and I have a lot of friends in that scene. But yeah, so like La Luz de Jesus Gallery, when they heard about the book, they asked me to do an art show of the artwork from the book. So it was originally planned for April 4th, and we were going to have a real opening and have people there and everything. I was looking into hiring a John Wayne Gacy impersonator to scare people. But yeah, then the lockdown started happening, and we postponed it to May, and then we're still on lockdown, of course. So yeah, we started planning to do a virtual opening, which a lot of galleries are starting to do that now. I'm not sure to the degree of what success that's happening for, how well that's working, but it was, at least it was a fun experiment. It was definitely a strange literal solo show experience to be in the gallery with just me and the gallery director filming me talking about it. But it was fun, to have a chance to like actually talk about every piece individually. And so I hoped people tuned in, but we couldn't figure out how to do it other than Instagram Live, so Instagram TV. So I think some people tuned in, but then that stuff disappears eventually. So
Yeah, I had originally texted, like when the show was first announced, I texted Dave Baker and I was like, I'm coming up to LA and we're gonna go to this. It's gonna be great. And then like it got postponed and I was like, oh, everything is ruined.
yeah, yeah, it's a bummer. That's, and hey Dave, he was texting me earlier today. um
I picked up one of the prints from the show though, so I just got to find a frame big enough because it's huge.
Oh, thanks. Nice. Well, I mean, 18 by 24 is a pretty standard frame. You can order it off of whatever frame store online.
Is that the one with Gacy? I think.
Yeah, it's a poster. That was actually so early on. I proposed a couple of cover sketches, and that was one of the covers I proposed. That was very much in the EC style with the three hosts, and they rejected that for the cover of the book. The editors did, but I ended up just using it for the poster for the art show instead.
And the art show's cool because again, you got to see kind of your process in it, and a lot of it is the inks for it. Were you working the same that you normally work in pencil and ink, and then were you coloring digitally?
Yeah, most of my work now is like I still draw and ink everything by hand, and then I scan it and I color in Photoshop. With the exception of occasional painted pieces, like the Richard Chase one was actually painted. But yeah, I mostly color in Photoshop digitally, just because for comics it's easier to like do the separations and everything. So I don't like working on the computer at all, but I do it.
As always, thanks for listening to this episode of the Pages and Panels podcast. Another big thanks to Tom Neely for coming on and talking about his work on the last book on the left. If you want to find out more from Tom, you can do so by going to iwilldestroyyou.com, or you can check out Tom on Twitter at Tom Neely Art. Again, if you go out, make sure you pick up the last book on the left with art from Tom Neely. Also check out his other stuff. The Humans is so fucking good. Henry and Glenn Live Forever. If you listen to this episode and you enjoy it, please make sure to rate and review the show on any platform you're listening on, or share the show. All that helps me and Tim to grow the show, get guests, and do all that other shit. An additional announcement, we have a sister show with me and Jack Foster called The Greatest Comic Book of All Time that I read this week with Kyle and Jack. In each week we will talk about the greatest comic book of all time that we read that week. It will rotate between newer titles and older titles. First episode is up for free on the Pages and Panels feed. It will be a weekly podcast. Next week's episode will be behind the $1 paywall on the Pages and Panels Patreon. So if you are interested in that, for $1 a month, you will get a weekly podcast from me and Jack talking about comic books. Eventually we hope to build an audience, have discussions about books, get suggestions, eventually have live recordings and chats and video to do all that. Pages and Panels will continue to be a weekly podcast that will be free. It will only be the greatest comic book of all time that will be behind the $1 paywall, and that will be weekly as well. So we will be doing 2 weekly podcasts. Again, at that $1 level, you will get access to the podcast. You will get a shout out on the Pages and Panels podcast. And then if for some reason you want to donate more, we have an additional tier, which you can at that point make a recommendation for me and Jack, and we will do an episode including a book of your pick. But as always, again, thanks for listening. We'll get back to the episode.
So I think last time we might have talked in person was at San Diego, and
Yeah.
I think you had mentioned for the new Humans book, The Jungle, you were originally shooting for a March release date. So I guess just where are you at now with The Jungle?
Well, that release date's was always being pushed back a bit by bit, and now it's up in the air because of who knows what's going on with publishing at the moment. But I can tell you, I am halfway through issue 2, but that's actually about probably 60 pages into the story, because each issue, like the first issue, is a 48-page double issue. Second issue is probably going to run over 30 pages. Now that we're kind of in lockdown and like there's no real schedule or looming deadlines, I'm taking the opportunity to just like kind of stretch my wings and be like, let's just make this better. Let's give it as many pages as it needs. Let's give each page as much time as it needs. You know, I'm slowing down my pace, and just like it'll come out sometime next year when it's done. And I plan to get all 5 issues, which will be the first half of the story arc, which would comprise Volume 3 of The Humans, Volume 1 of The Jungle, however it's marketed. So I plan on getting all that done this year, and then we'll hopefully launch it sometime next year when the world gets back on schedule. And I'm not sure, at this point I'm not sure whether we'll do monthly or just go straight to volume. It's like whatever makes sense depending on how things shake out with Diamond and publishing and how the industry is writing things out. But I'm just enjoying drawing my apes every day lately, and it's nice to like just not having the looming deadlines or looming conventions like stressing me out to make me think, oh, I gotta draw faster because deadlines. So now I can be like, I think I'll spend 2 days on this page instead of like trying to rush through it, So it's been cool. I think this is gonna be a really, really fucking good book when it's done. So
Yeah, I mean, I was going to ask that, but obviously especially when I've talked to people about The Humans in the past. I mean, obviously it's filtered through these I can't say it.
anthropomorphic.
Yeah. Apes, but like it. I mean, that's beside the point. I mean, it's like these really smart and in-depth human stories, and that just happens to be kind of the setting you guys push it through. So I was obviously you answered it, but I was going to wonder, like, have you been able to kind of go through and explore those kind of deeper as you do it with this kind of break in the world?
Definitely. I mean, well, it's interesting because like it's spoiler alert if you haven't read The Humans. Anybody? It's the sequel to The Humans, which we did with Image Comics. It's now The Jungle, and spoiler alert: some of the characters from The Humans have gone to prison. So it's a prison comic, and we're kind of on quarantine. So it's interesting to like exercise these the mundanity and the monotony of life in comics while I'm going through it at home. Because we've been LA has been pretty strict and we're abiding by it. Trying to be very careful here. We don't go out except to the grocery store, and my studio is about the size of a prison cell. So it's fun to like kind of think I'm in that world a little bit. I mean, not to relate my life to actual prisoners, but but yeah, just like you can kind of put yourself a little bit in the mindset of the monotony of like every day being the same thing, and like how do I make this interesting? So how do I make a page of 9 panel grid of like dude apes talking to each other in a cell interesting? I have to like make extra leaps to like make those pages more interesting because it is a very different comic than before, where it was much more dynamic and motorcycles and psychedelia. This one's more hardcore, gritty, like you're in the dungeon. So
Is that, I mean, in for all of your kind of work in series, obviously, the Human seems like one where you guys can kind of keep coming back to it because again, I love the conceit of that world, but then again, really, for lack of a better term, human stories coming through these people. I mean,
yeah,
and especially the times you're in, there's like so many unique ways you can go with it and explore things, like obviously like the Vietnam and everything like that. So I mean, is that something you guys hope to continue, just to keep building this long-standing narrative for these characters?
definitely. I mean, we have planned in the long run at least 4 story arcs. The Jungle being the second one. And we always planned it rather than doing like an ongoing like monthly schedule, like kill yourself schedule nightmare. We were like, let's approach it as like some distinct miniseries that would exist as volumes or seasons. So The Humans issue 1 through 10, volume 1 and 2 is the first book. The Jungle, which will be 10 issues or 2 volumes, is the second book, and then we have a third major story arc, which is yet to be named, that is planned out, and a couple of offshoot side stories. One that I love the idea was actually I suggested it, and we've been kind of writing it together. Keenan primarily writes, but like I throw him a lot of ideas, and he riffs on them. And so the one idea I had was like Carnes on the road. Like Carnes, our most gruesome character in the gang of The Humans, goes nomad once our buddies, some of them are in prison. Carnes escapes and goes what's called nomad when you leave your hometown or your turf in biker gangs and you're just roaming across the country. So we have a mini series where he's just a solo adventurer on the road by himself, which will be fun to draw as well. So like we definitely have like a lot of other ideas, but it's all a matter of like when can we do it, because like we really don't make a lot of money making the Humans comics, so I have to make money otherwise, like last book on the left. So it's a lot of like stops and pauses, but like our plans are we want to do a lot of Human stories in the future, but it might take a long time.
Surprising to hear you don't make money in comics.
I mean, I don't not make money in comics, but it doesn't make my entire living. It's a small percentage of my living. Most of it comes from freelance work and illustration work, and then occasionally a big awesome project like last book on the left happens, and like that basically funded this year to be able to stay at home and draw the jungle. So I kind of balance. I try to balance out my work. Like the comics that I want to draw is my passion, and I don't put the pressure of making money off that because it's my passion and my artwork. And then I take on work that will pay the bills that is I have less of a passion for, but sometimes those things work out together. Like the last book on the left was a dream job, like I said. But I've done a lot of stuff in the past that I'm not proud of, or that I wouldn't show you, just for the paycheck. So,
Yeah, and that's been, I mean, I think the very first episode I did back in Volume 1, I think one of the I'm not going to do anything today. It's COVID setting, and I've been in my house too long, but antithesis of
yeah,
the idea was that there's like tons of work that go into comic books, and I think I was working in for sites and doing reviews and stuff like that, getting so frustrated sometimes dealing with quote unquote comic fans who, pick up a book and say like this is garbage, and like kind of undersell the amount of work and effort that goes into something. Even like last night we did an interview talking to an illustrator who still has a job at a liquor store during the night to support the art he's doing during the day. And so like comics are such a like time intensive process, and again there's such hit or miss whether a book is going to make money, and unless you're like the Bendises and Hickmans of the world, like you really have to do a lot. I mean, so many people are like professors and teaching classes to like kind of do it, and so like comics is a passion. So like again, it was always like if you pick something up and you don't like it, respect the amount of work and effort that no one like half-ass a comic book. Like it's just
definitely
you can't do it. It's like it's too time consuming as it is to put it out a shitty one.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, so not to divulge like numbers necessarily, but like if to put it in perspective, like the Humans 10 issues took me about 3 years to develop and draw in its entirety, but that was with the help of a colorist, Christina Cayantes, and an assistant, Carmen Monoxide, and Keenan writing. And like we had a small team working together, but that was about probably 400 or 500 pages of drawings, if you give or take all the conceptual art and like additional artwork that goes into it, in 3 years. And the amount of money I made off of that series, I'm not griping. It was great. It was phenomenal. I'd never made this much money off comics before, but it was equal to the amount of money I'd made off of 80 drawings last year working for a major book publisher illustrating a book for major writers. So that's how different the worlds of like book illustration versus comics illustration are in what you can make. For example, I don't know, it's like, I don't know if I'm divulging too much information, but it's like there's a huge difference in like how much you make off of comics. So most people that are working in comics are doing it partly because they fucking love it, and so I give everybody respect for that. Even though there's still a lot of like people that like make shitty comics that I'm like, why are you doing that? But but it's still like anybody that's doing it, I think we're doing it because we love it. So yeah, anyway, not to be too maudlin.
Yeah, and I mean you touched on it a little bit too. I mean, especially with like what the future might be for the Humans in the jungle, having worked in like even the more independent stuff with Henry and Glenn forever, and then Humans with Image. I mean, what is it like then working through kind of the independent versus like the distributor stuff and dealing with Image? And obviously like the kind of conversation now is like what is going to happen with all that stuff, what would be the ideal situation, and even like the big thing for me is like how do we get more independent or different stuff easily into the hands of the people, because we've had conversations with people who you're trying to get books through Diamond. They want to know your follower count and stuff like that, and just like the amount of work that has to go into like getting a book into someone's hands is ridiculous. And like it's such a weird thing. Okay.
My hope is that I don't know. My hope is that the smarter, more versatile stores that have a larger, more diverse berth of like what they carry and what they're interested in. I'm talking stores like Floating World in Portland, or like Forbidden Planet in New York, or Secret Headquarters in LA. Like people that have an interest outside of like just fucking DC and Marvel, Diamond bullshit. I think those stores will do well, and I hope that they'll do well and survive through this. And I hope that more other stores will follow suit, and we will maybe break this monopoly that Diamond has held over the distribution through this. I mean, that would be my hope. I've been anti-Diamond since the beginning, even though some of my books go through them. I mean, Image definitely goes through Diamond, so I can't fight that. But none of my independent self-published books have gone through Diamond. They were all rejected. Henry and Glenn was rejected for 4 or 5 years until they heard that we had sold 100,000 copies without Diamond, and then they were like, "Oh, we want you." So it's like Diamond is stupid, and I think it should go away. And I would be happy if some other distribution system sprung up in the meantime. But of course, I don't know. I have no control over that. I mean, I'm mostly concerned with like just trying to draw comics and hope that there's some kind of way for them to be distributed next year. When I finish the book, that's all I can do right now is focus on my pages, because it's got to be a nightmare for anybody dealing with, and I'm not an expert on that. But like, I definitely have had some dealings with the Diamond that I don't wish them to come back in the same capacity that they had before. But I'm not an expert on any of this, so.
Wait, we're not unknown to ask things on Castle. Because Tim, you cover a lot of that.
Yeah.
I noticed like the last 2 weeks stuff has come out. Has it been through that new channel that DC had set up? Is it because I noticed they're like the only ones, maybe some Image stuff.
I think I just saw like just the DC stuff, but I don't know if it was like the new whatever Lunar and UCS, I think they're called. I just saw a picture on Bleeding Cool of like Diamond's new, and new is in quotes, like packaging, which didn't actually really help anything. So I don't know. Yeah, Diamond sucks.
Yeah,
it always has.
Yeah. That whole Back the Comeback campaign was bullshit, and then there's like some shit with like a new Batman issue that's gonna have like 50,000 covers, and they think that's gonna fight. And so like creating a new glut is gonna save the industry. Go fuck yourself. Like I don't give a shit about that part of the industry. There have been like a handful of stores across the nation that have supported me over the years. It's basically probably less than 20. It's probably larger than that, the humans wise, a little bit, but not much. So I don't know. I love comic shops. It's the first place I want to go in every town I visit and find what's there. But a lot of them are stupid, and they just bow down to the previews catalog every month, and they don't look beyond that. And sorry that those are gonna die.
Yeah. Well, and that's what's so frustrating. And like, I hate sitting on like social media all day, but like I find for me like that is my previews, is like I have to go through people's accounts, see what like I'll find like an artist I love, see what they're reading, see what they're retweeting, try and figure out how I can track down that book, and like it's such a fucking like hoops to jump through to find books that you like. It's crazy.
Yeah, and I understand, like, even for stores to like try, and the stores that do track the indie publishers and indie creators, I mean, God bless them for like keeping track of that in addition to keeping track of like the stupid Diamond shit. So like those are the people that are actually doing the hard work of like trying to figure out what is good in the world. But like there's plenty of stores that are just like, oh, Batman, okay, I'll order that, whatever, fuck, I don't give a shit about that. So sorry.
Good.
I've been inside for a long time.
When I saw you went out to secret headquarters today, and usually something we've been starting the cast with, but like especially now with more free time, what have you been reading?
Well, today actually it was yesterday but yeah, I guess it doesn't matter. For New Comic Book Day, I guess the first time that Diamond has had a day, I went back. I actually have every single issue of Savage Dragon from the beginning, so I got the new issue of that. I am an Eric Larson Savage Dragon geek for multiple
You just
reasons
gotta
that are
love that
complicated,
dragon
but
sex.
I've kept it. Yeah, and I'm rooting for him to hit 300 and beyond, but like 250 is coming up, so like good for him. But and then I also picked up a collection, Slum Wolf, by I'm gonna say it wrong, but Suge, Tadao Suge, the manga artist. Um, but I've read very little of his stuff, just like short stories here and there, and so Slum Wolf is a collection of more short stories that I'm gonna like. I've been reading mostly manga this year, actually. So that's been just a new exploration for me, just finding more stuff.
And that's Slum Wolf. I've had it saved on my list of things to get because it's like short stories with like crime and like essentially the slums of the town, right?
Yeah, it seems so far. I've only read the first couple of stories, but he
Looks
seemed to
good.
be like an early manga artist who approached more like naturalistic stories about real life. But I think later in his career, he gets much more abstract and strange and weird. So I'm looking forward to seeing. I think Drawn and Quarterly has like a new series of like trying to like do all of his books or something. But there's a few collections that have been translated by that Ryan Holmberg that have come out in the last few years that are pretty interesting.
And so, I mean, usually towards the end, I mean, it's kind of Tim has the last question, but he kind of always asks like what it's like to have people pick up the books, or like what do you want people to take away from the project currently. And obviously, with like last book on the left being the most recent, I mean, it's got to be obviously a weird experience in that sense. I mean, what when people pick it up, or even having people experience and reading it, I mean, what do you hope people take away from that? I mean, I don't know. That's kind of a weird question for that specifically, but like obviously, still you've put a lot of work into that book and a lot of again your own thoughts and humor into that. It's still got to be hoping people appreciate your work in some way while still kind of people again picking it up for this kind of phenomenon podcast at this point.
Right. Well, I mean, I'd say for that book, as well as pretty much anything I do, I don't mean this is like in like a bragging way, but there's a lot more layers to what I do than I think a lot of people get on face value. So a lot of my humor is very layered and rooted in art history, and there's lots of details and Easter eggs and clues throughout Henry and Glenn and Humans and last book and The Blot and The Wolf. Everything I've done, like there's a dialogue going on behind my artwork that nobody ever seems to engage in. So I kind of like would invite people to like maybe spend a little more time with some of my images and peel back some of the layers and see if they can find some of those Easter eggs that I've left in there.
And I mean, even the hearing you just talk briefly about the Richard Chase one again, like the thought that goes into that, and again, like approaching that piece with again, out of like all the killers in that book, like you said, he's if anyone is sympathetic or anyone that has you can look at who essentially society failed him in the sense not understanding mental health,
Yeah.
and he would have been I don't know if he would have been fine, but he maybe wouldn't have killed people and drank blood if he was properly medicated.
Right. He's just the most tragic, and I just wanted to portray that somehow. And, like, I mean, in a humorous way, too. So you mimic Margaret Keane, but, like, still there's a lot of, like, pathos in all of her work. And I don't know. Like, yeah, so, yeah, I think that's what I'm trying to say is, like, there's a lot of layers to what I do. And, yeah, I hope people look deeper than just, like, the face value joke.
So I'll let, unless Tim has something else about the books or anything, I'll let Tim do his final question.
I kind of knowing you, Tom, I think you're going to love this question.
Okay.
Gun to your head, if you had to write one episode of The Big Bang Theory, what would happen?
Oh, fuck. I actually do not like that show at all. That's the show that like my mom I was always like watches, and she tells me like, "Oh, this reminds me of you and your friends in high school." And then I'll like try to watch half an episode. I'm like, God damn it! I fucking hate the way people view nerds in the world.
Yeah.
So I guess I'd write an episode where they all fucking shoot themselves in the head. Like, I don't know. I don't like that show.
Perfect.
I'm sorry.
That's a common answer. When it's like,
Yeah, I mean, no, just service to the people that made it, whatever. A lot of people put a lot of work into it, but it was not made for people like me. I don't know.
Yeah, and I always feel like, I mean, anyone who is, I guess, like a quote unquote nerd in the sense that they, enjoy comic books or video games or D&D, like, will hear that, because like I have the same with my mom. Is
Yep.
like, oh, have you seen Big Bang Theory? You would like it. It's like you. And I'm like, I
Or,
don't.
or even like Amazon or eBay recommends. They're like, oh, you like
Yeah.
comic books? Well, maybe you like action figures and Barbie dolls. I'm like, no, I don't. Like, why? Why are you suggesting this to me? Like,
I just wonder, is like, is that what I appear like from, like, 20 feet away? Like, is that what it looks like I'm doing when I'm?
yeah. And now, like, I'm getting all the serial killer algorithms following me and suggesting, like, oh, you're one of those people. We're gonna send this stuff to you. So, who knows? I was always wondering, like, all my Google searches for image searches last year were just like murder and serial killers and like death and everything. Is like, I'm definitely on an FBI watch list now. So,
Oh, for sure. Well, I always feel I use, because I have a work laptop too, and I generally doing that at work. Like, I'm like, well, if I'm gonna sit and write a service plan or something, I'm gonna have a podcast. So I'll like listen to a podcast, and I'm like, oh, that murder sounds interesting, and I'm googling it and I'm looking it up, and I was like, oh, you can look at crime scene photos, and then like the next thing you know, like 30 minutes later, I'm on my work computer with like crime scene photos. I'm like, this is probably, if someone ever goes through my history, it's gonna be bad.
yep.
If anyone wants to find you and your work, what's the best way they could do that?
Well, my main website is iwilldestroyu.com, if people go to websites at all. I'm on Instagram at iwilldestroytom, and Twitter at Tom Neely Art. And I have a Patreon, which is patreon.com/Tom Neely. If you you can actually watch me creating the jungle in process. I post a lot of process of as I'm building that story right now. So if you want to subscribe to that, that's cool. But yeah, I'm out there. iwilldestroyu.com is the main thing. So
Yeah, that's what's cool. You have like a lot of like process work out there, which is always fun to watch. Even like I think it's the promo for the gallery. There's like
Yeah.
a short, like 8-minute video of you doing the Chikatilo piece.
yeah.
This is
That's a
great.
lot of what I do on my Patreon is like make little videos of me creating pieces and make commentaries on how I do it. So yeah, hopefully it'd be nice to have more followers over there, but it's cool to like have that little outlet as well. So
Well, and that's, I mean, not to get on like another ranty type thing, but again, like if people want to make a difference in how comics are made, like I think there was that wave of Kickstarter, and even for whatever reason now, like a lot of big people have been going to it. But Patreon's a great way to support creators in what they're doing, and kind
Yeah.
of another good avenue for them to be able to produce the things you want without having to kind of filter it through other avenues.
yeah, I mean, not to like go on like a horn about this, but like, I mean, like a lot of people perceive like someone like me is like actually making a living in comics, but I do a lot of hustling and like doing a lot of other stuff to like make ends meet so I can make comics. But like something like Patreon is like a way to monetize what we do on Instagram for free, and then to go for me, I try to go in more in depth and give like more knowledge about what I do on there for the few people that do support me that way. But yeah, it's an awesome way to like support artists, and I support several artists on there as well. So yeah, I'd encourage people to check that out, especially now it's like more entertainment to watch on TV, and some people like it's just like $1 a month. I mean, that's as cheap as you can go with me. So whatever. Sorry, it's a long plug, but I think Patreon is a good thing for artists to have a little supplemental income to keep them going, and for like the true patrons who want to support them that way, it's a great outlet. So
yeah, I love it. And someone who doesn't need support because he's hawking those COVID guests on the black market. Tim, where can they find you?
Don't tell people that. I write about comics over at Comics Pit, and I'm on Twitter and Instagram at Tim Madera.
And I say it all the time. You probably know this stuff if you're listening to podcasts because you don't stumble upon comic book podcasts. But we are on Twitter at pages_panels. Our email is ourpodcastsucks@gmail.com. And I think that's it. Or I'm Kyle Overkill on Twitter. But more importantly is go out in any way you can support Tom's stuff. Do it. Again, pick up Last Book on the Left, but more importantly, Humans, support that. Get on the Patreon because, again, any more stuff we can get from Tom is what we need. So thanks so much for joining us. Again, we really appreciate it. And again, Last Book on the Left is fantastic, but was rereading through the Humans, and it's so fucking good.
awesome. Well, thanks for having me on. It's been fun talking to you, and yeah, I hope you guys are back for more Humans because I think the jungle's going to be even better.
Looking forward to it.
Awesome. Thanks, guys.
All right, thank you.
No problem. And that's this issue of Pages and Panels. And next week we'll return to covering George Lopez. Thanks.
Bazinga! Bazinga!